On a crisp Tuesday morning, the New York Stock Exchange opened not with a bang but with a bloodbath centered on one of America's most iconic brands, Stellara Air. Their stock, usually a bastion of blue-chip stability, was in a catastrophic freefall, shedding nearly 20% of its value in the opening 90 minutes. Billions in market capitalization vanished into thin air. The cause wasn't a crash or a corporate scandal in the usual sense. It was the result of a single email sent at 5:01 a.m. that terminated a $300 million contract, and it all started 35,000 feet in the air with a plate of pan-seared salmon that was never served. Dr. Evelyn Reed was a woman who moved through the world with a quiet, deliberate grace that belied the seismic force of her intellect and influence. As the founder and CEO of Auragen Dynamics, a titan in the field of AI-driven renewable energy logistics, she controlled a global network that was redefining the future of power. Her face had graced the covers of Forbes, and Wired her TED Talks were legendary, and her name was whispered with a mixture of awe and intimidation in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Shanghai. Yet on this particular Monday evening, she was just a passenger. She boarded Stellara Air Flight SA-212 from San Francisco to New York, her mind a universe away from the hushed elegance of the first-class cabin. She was en route to finalize the last details of a monumental partnership with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a deal hinging on Auragen's revolutionary grid management AI, the airline for this crucial cross-country network, Stellara Air, the beneficiary of a freshly inked $300 million exclusive contract for all of Auragen's executive travel and high-priority cargo for the next 5 years. Evelyn settled into seat 2A, the fabric of her tailored charcoal suit barely wrinkling. She was a commanding presence, not through volume, but through an unnerving stillness. Her salt and pepper hair was cut in a sharp, elegant bob, and her eyes behind a pair of discreet designer frames missed nothing. She noted the flight attendant serving her section, a woman in her late 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and a name tag that read Brenda. Brenda's smile was a masterpiece of practiced insincerity, a thin, tight line that never quite reached her eyes. As the cabin door sealed and the plane began its taxi, Evelyn pulled out a tablet, its screen glowing with complex energy consumption algorithms. She was absorbed, her focus a tangible thing. The pre-flight champagne was offered, and she politely accepted a glass of sparkling water with lime instead. Brenda delivered it with a curt nod, her eyes flicking over Evelyn's simple, elegant attire, and lingering for a fraction of a second too long. It was a look Evelyn had seen 1,000 times before a flicker of assessment, of categorization, of disbelief that this black woman belonged in this seat, in this cabin, in this world. Evelyn chose to ignore it. She had battles to fight, and this was not one of them. Or so she thought. The flight reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin crew began their service. The purser, a harried-looking man named Mark, walked through the cabin, personally handing out the dinner menus. He greeted each passenger by name, a hallmark of Stellara's premium service. "Mr. Davies, a pleasure to have you with us again." "Mrs. Albright, I trust your connection was smooth." When he reached 2A, he paused. He glanced down at his passenger manifest, then at Evelyn, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his tone missing the personal warmth he'd offered the others. "Tonight's menu." He handed it to her and moved on before she could respond. Evelyn's eyebrow arched slightly. It was a small thing, a tiny tear in the fabric of professional courtesy, but it was noted. She opened the menu. The main course options were a filet mignon, a saffron risotto, or the pan-seared salmon with a lemon dill sauce. Having had a long day, the light, flavorful salmon sounded perfect. When Brenda returned to take her order, Evelyn closed her tablet and gave the flight attendant her full attention. "Good evening. I'll have the salmon, please." Brenda's smile remained fixed. She tapped her pen on her notepad. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension. "And what was your original seat number, dear?" Evelyn blinked. "I'm sorry." "Your seat? In the main cabin?" Brenda elaborated her voice a little louder now, as if speaking to someone slow of understanding. "I need to know for the catering count. Sometimes we have upgrades and the numbers get a bit mixed up." The implication was as clear as it was insulting. Brenda didn't believe Evelyn was a paying first-class passenger. She assumed she was an upgrade, perhaps a mistaken one. Evelyn's posture remained unchanged, her voice perfectly level. "My seat is 2A. It is the only seat I have had on this aircraft. I will have the salmon." Brenda's smile tightened into a bloodless line. Without another word, she scribbled something on her pad and moved to the passenger across the aisle, a portly man in a loud golf shirt. "Mr. Davies," she chirped, her voice instantly transformed into a cascade of warmth. "The filet for you, I assume, the usual medium rare." Evelyn watched the exchange, a cold knot forming in her stomach. This was more than a simple slight. This was a deliberate, calculated act of invalidation. She took a slow, deep breath and turned her gaze to the window, watching the endless twilight stretch across the curve of the earth. The battle, it seemed, was coming to her, after all. The scent of warming food soon filled the cabin. Hot towels were distributed, tablecloths were laid, and the clinking of real silverware against porcelain began to create a comfortable domestic rhythm. Brenda moved with an efficient, practiced grace, delivering appetizers and salads. When she arrived at Evelyn's row, she served the man in 2B, then turned to Evelyn. She placed a small side salad in front of her. "I'm terribly sorry," Brenda said, her voice devoid of any actual sorrow. "It seems we've run out of the salmon." Evelyn looked at the salad, then back at Brenda's impassive face. "You've run out? You took my order not 20 minutes ago." "I know it's just so popular," Brenda said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We can offer you the risotto, or I believe we might have a spare chicken meal from the premium economy cabin." The mention of a meal from a lower class was the final deliberate twist of the knife. It was designed to put Evelyn in her place. The man in 2B, who had been listening, shot Evelyn a sympathetic glance before quickly burying his nose in his wineglass. He clearly wanted no part of the unfolding drama. Evelyn, however, was not one for drama. She was one for facts. "Brenda!" She began, her voice still quiet, but now infused with a steel that made the flight attendant's feigned smile falter. "I was one of the first passengers to board. You took my order before you took the order of the gentleman in row 4. I find it statistically improbable that you would run out of an entree so quickly, especially given that you have yet to serve half the cabin." A few heads turned. The quiet hum of the cabin was now punctuated by a tense silence. Brenda's composure cracked. A flush of anger crept up her neck. "Ma'am, I don't control the catering. We are out of the salmon. You can have the risotto or the chicken. That's what's available." "I see," Evelyn said, her gaze unwavering. "Then perhaps you can ask your colleague. Maybe there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake," Brenda snapped, her voice rising. At that moment, the purser Mark emerged from the galley, alerted by the change in atmosphere. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing the question to Brenda, but looking at Evelyn. "This passenger is upset that we've run out of her first meal choice," Brenda reported, playing the victim. "I've offered her the available alternatives." Mark turned his fraught, non-confrontational eyes to Evelyn. "Ma'am, I do apologize. On busy flights, catering can sometimes be unpredictable. Evelyn decided to change tactics. She addressed Mark directly, her tone shifting from inquiry to command. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. Please check your passenger manifest. You'll find my ticket was purchased, not upgraded. You will also find a note from Stellara Corporate Relations flagging my travel, as I am the CEO of Aura Gen Dynamics. We just signed a $300 million logistics and travel partnership with your airline. Now, understanding that context, please go and check the galley for my meal." The cabin was now dead silent. The name Aura Gen Dynamics, combined with the dollar amount, hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mark's face went pale. He knew the name. The partnership had been the subject of a massive internal celebration, a huge win for Stellara in a competitive market. He stammered, "Dr. Reed, of course. I wasn't aware. Please allow me one moment." He shot a venomous glare at Brenda before practically running to the galley. Brenda stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. She had picked a fight with the wrong person, and she knew it. A few minutes later, the curtain to the galley swished open, but it wasn't Mark who emerged. It was Brenda. She was carrying a tray. On it, perfectly presented, was a plate of pan-seared salmon with a lemon dill sauce. She placed it on Evelyn's tray table without a word, her hands trembling slightly. Her face was a mottled red, her eyes fixed on the plate. "Thank you, Brenda," Evelyn said, her voice cool and neutral. The victory was hollow, tainted by the fight required to achieve it. But the ordeal wasn't over. As Brenda turned to leave, she leaned in close, her voice, a venomous whisper meant only for Evelyn. "You think you're so important, don't you? Some people just have to make a fuss." And then she was gone, leaving the ugly words hanging in the air. Evelyn looked at the meal she had fought for. Her appetite was gone. This was no longer about a plate of fish. It was about an institutional culture that allowed an employee to behave this way, and a system that only responded to the threat of money and power, not to the simple expectation of human dignity. She picked up her fork, but she knew this meal would be the most expensive one Stellara Air had ever served. After the forced apology and the whispered insult, a chill descended over row 2. Brenda avoided Evelyn's gaze for the remainder of the meal service, sending a junior flight attendant to clear her barely touched plate. The silent treatment was its own form of aggression, a childish, petty display that only solidified Evelyn's resolve. She knew that complaining to the purser Mark would be futile. He was a man who clearly prioritized de-escalation over resolution, a manager who managed by avoidance. He had seen the problem, understood the stakes, and his solution was to produce the meal and scurry away, hoping the issue would dissolve with the main course. He was a symptom of the disease, not the cure. Evelyn needed to speak to the person in charge, the final authority on the aircraft. She pressed the call button. A younger flight attendant appeared. "Yes, ma'am. I would like to speak with the captain, please," Evelyn said calmly. The attendant's eyes widened. This was an unusual request, one typically reserved for medical emergencies or security threats. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" "I have a serious customer service issue. I need to report directly to the flight's commander." Evelyn stated, leaving no room for negotiation. The attendant scurried away. A few minutes later, Mark the purser reappeared, his face etched with a new layer of anxiety. "Dr. Reed," he began, his voice low and placating. "I understand you wish to speak to Captain Henderson. He's very busy with flight operations at the moment. Perhaps I can assist you. I assure you I will file a full report on the misunderstanding with the meal service." The word misunderstanding was a lit match on dry tinder. "It was not a misunderstanding, Muck," Evelyn replied, her voice dangerously quiet. It was a deliberate act of discrimination, and your flight attendant, Brenda, followed it up with a direct, unprofessional insult. This is not a matter for a post-flight customer service form. This is a matter of the conduct of the crew under his command. I will speak to the captain. Mark's face fell. He knew he was beaten. Please wait here, he mumbled, and disappeared towards the cockpit. 10 long minutes passed. The cabin lights were dimmed as passengers began to settle in for the cross-country flight. Finally, the cockpit door opened, and a tall man with silvering hair and a distinct air of self-importance emerged. This was Captain Henderson. He strode down the aisle, his pilot's jacket unbuttoned, an expression of profound irritation on his face. He stopped at Evelyn's seat, choosing to stand over her, rather than crouch to her level. "I'm Captain Henderson," he announced, his voice a low rumble designed to convey authority. "Mark tells me you have a complaint." "I do, Captain," Evelyn said, refusing to be intimidated by his posture. "Your first-class flight attendant, Brenda, refused me meal service based on what I can only assume was a prejudiced assumption about my presence in this cabin. She lied about catering availability and was condescending and insulting. The purser was aware and only rectified the situation when I invoked my company's corporate account." The captain listened, his expression unchanged. He glanced around the darkened cabin, then back at Evelyn. "Ma'am, we are on a 5-hour flight. Personalities can clash. My crew is professional, but they are also human. Brenda has been with this airline for over 30 years. I can assure you she is not a racist." He said the word as if it were a preposterous accusation. "You got your meal, so I consider the matter resolved. I suggest you try to get some rest. We'll be in New York before you know it." It was a masterclass in corporate dismissal, a pat on the head, a complete invalidation of her experience, and a clear signal that he considered her the problem. He had already tried and convicted her as a hysterical passenger. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. She saw the entire system in his tired, dismissive eyes, the casual prejudice of Brenda, the cowardly compliance of Mark, and the arrogant indifference of the captain. They were a closed loop of mediocrity and bias, protecting their own against any outside complaint. "Thank you for your time, Captain," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. He gave a curt nod, satisfied that he had quashed the minor rebellion, and returned to the cockpit. Evelyn leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Her mind was no longer on the Port Authority deal or grid algorithms. It was a cold, clear engine of calculation. She had given the system a chance to correct itself. She had escalated the issue through the proper channels, from the flight attendant to the purser to the captain. And at every single level, the system had failed closing ranks to protect itself. Her decision was made. They had refused to hear her voice. They would hear her company's. Across the aisle and one row back, a young man named Liam, a computer science student from Stanford, quietly stopped the video he had been discreetly recording on his phone. He had recognized Dr. Evelyn Reed when she boarded. He'd watched her TED Talk just last week. Initially, he'd just wanted a stealthy clip of his hero to show his friends, but he had inadvertently captured everything: Brenda's condescending question, the confrontation, and the captain's final, shocking dismissal. He looked down at the footage on his screen, his heart pounding. He had no idea what he had just recorded, but he knew it was important. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of forced politeness. Evelyn declined any further service, wrapping herself in a cocoon of silence. She didn't work. She didn't read. She simply sat, her mind a whirlwind of strategic planning. Anger was a luxury she rarely afforded herself. She preferred to channel the raw energy of injustice into fuel for decisive action. She was a chess player, and Stellara Air's crew had just tipped over the board, foolishly believing they had won the game. When the plane touched down at JFK, the jolt of the landing was like a starting pistol. While the other passengers were groaning and stretching, Evelyn had her phone in hand. The moment the no electronic devices sign switched off, she was dialing. Her first call was to Havis Brown, her chief financial officer and oldest friend. Havis was a man who understood numbers in the way a poet understands words. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert, despite the late hour in California. "Evelyn, you've landed." "I've landed, Chavis," she said, her voice a low, controlled hum. "Tell me how ironclad is the exit clause in the Stellara partnership." There was a pause on the other end. "The exit clause. It's standard. Breach of service, reputational damage, failure to meet agreed-upon standards of care." "Why, what happened?" Evelyn watched Captain Henderson stride out of the cockpit, laughing with another crew member utterly oblivious. She saw Brenda bustling through the cabin, her face set in a look of smug defiance. "They failed to meet the standards of care," Evelyn said softly. "I want you to invoke the reputational damage clause, effective immediately." Havis was silent for a beat. He knew Evelyn. He knew her capacity for calm, her abhorrence of impulsive decisions. For her to make a call like this, something catastrophic must have occurred. "Evelyn, this is a $300 million, 5-year exclusive deal. The ink is barely dry. Are you sure? At 5 a.m. Eastern Time, I want a press release to go out to all major financial news outlets." Evelyn continued ignoring his question as if it were irrelevant. "The statement will be simple. Auragen Dynamics has terminated its partnership with Stellara Air, effective immediately due to a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and a failure to meet the expected standards of professional conduct essential for a partnership of this scale." No further details, no accusations, just that. "My God, Evelyn, what did they do?" Havis pressed his voice, a mixture of alarm and curiosity. "They served me a lesson in corporate arrogance, and now I'm going to serve them one in consequences," she replied. She saw her car service waiting just beyond the gate. "Call our legal head, Sarah, get the process started. I want the termination notice on the desk of Stellara's CEO, Richard Sterling, by the time the market opens. No exceptions." She hung up before Havis could protest further. She knew he would execute her orders flawlessly. That was why he was her CFO. As she deplaned, she made one last stop at the customer service desk in the terminal. The Stellara agent, a young woman with a weary but genuine smile, looked up. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to file a formal complaint against the crew of Flight SA-212. Evelyn said, her voice now calm and polite. She gave a brief, factual, and utterly unemotional account of the events, naming Brenda Mark and Captain Henderson. She detailed the meal denial, the insult, and the captain's dismissive response. She left out her name and her position. To this agent, she was just another passenger. The agent typed diligently, her brow furrowed with concern. "That's terrible," she said sincerely. "I am so sorry you experienced that. I've filed the report. It will be assigned to a case manager, and you should hear back within 10 business days." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "You've been very helpful." She walked away from the desk, a ghost of a smile on her lips. She had given the system one final chance to document its own failure. The complaint would crawl its way through the bureaucratic sludge of Stellara's Internal Affairs Department long after the atomic bomb she had just armed went off. Her driver, a man named James who had worked with her for years, opened the door to the waiting town car. "Good evening, Dr. Reed. To the hotel." "Yes, James," she said, sinking into the leather seat. "And please find me the best-rated seafood restaurant that delivers." As the car pulled away from the curb and merged into the glittering chaos of New York City traffic, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of reflection. She wasn't just pulling a contract. She was making a statement that in the modern world, dignity was not a negotiable commodity, and that sometimes the only way to teach a lesson to those who live in the sky is to bring them crashing down to earth. Tuesday morning broke over Manhattan with a cold, clear light. In the opulent office of Richard Sterling, CEO of Stellara Air, the mood was anything but clear. Sterling, a man whose tailored suits were as sharp as his temper, was staring at his computer screen, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his expensive silk tie. The press release had hit the wires at 5:01 a.m., just as Evelyn had commanded. By 6:30 a.m., it was the lead story on Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal's online edition. By the 9:30 a.m. opening bell, it was a full-blown crisis. Stellara Air's stock ticker symbol, SA, opened in a vertical dive. High-frequency trading algorithms programmed to react instantly to negative keywords like terminated partnership and fundamental misalignment began dumping the stock in massive blocks. Human traders spooked by the sudden loss of a $300 million contract from a tech behemoth like Auragen quickly followed suit. "What the hell is this?" "Jonathan!" Sterling roared into his speakerphone, his voice echoing across the mahogany desk. Jonathan Pierce, his chief communications officer, was already in damage control mode, but it was like trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. "Richard, we don't know yet," Jonathan stammered. "Auragen isn't talking. Their statement is all we have. It's vague, which is making everyone nervous. The market hates uncertainty. Uncertainty. It's a $300 million hole in our 5-year forecast. Get Reed on the phone. I want to know what this is about. We had dinner 2 weeks ago. We celebrated this deal." But Dr. Evelyn Reed was unreachable. All calls were being routed through her formidable chief legal officer, who offered only a polite but firm, "No comment." Sterling's initial belief was that it was a negotiation tactic, a power play by Evelyn to extract better terms. He saw the business world as a jungle, and he was one of its proudest lions. He refused to believe it could be anything else. His first public response, issued around 10:00 a.m., reflected this arrogant miscalculation. Stellara Air is surprised and disappointed by Auragen's abrupt decision. The statement read, "We believe this is a misunderstanding and are confident we can find a path forward to continue our promising partnership. Our commitment to our corporate clients remains unwavering." It was the corporate equivalent of "calm down, dear." It did nothing to stop the bleeding. The stock continued to plummet. Analysts began to speculate wildly. Had Stellara failed a key safety audit? Was there a secret financial malfeasance about to be exposed? The vagueness of Auragen's statement allowed everyone to imagine the worst. By 11:00 a.m., Sterling was on a frantic conference call with his board of directors, all of them demanding answers he didn't have. "Check everything," he ordered his team. "Every interaction we've had with Auragen, every flight any of their people have ever taken. I want to know what failure to meet standards means." An army of junior executives and analysts began a desperate search, digging through terabytes of data. They looked at cargo handling times on-time departure records for flights taken by Auragen employees and every piece of corporate correspondence. They found nothing. Stellara's service for Auragen, by every metric they could measure, had been exemplary. Meanwhile, in a quiet, forgotten corner of Stellara's vast bureaucracy, the customer complaint Evelyn had filed at JFK was assigned a case number 177B4109. It was flagged as a Level 2 complaint, non-urgent, and placed in a queue to be reviewed by a low-level case manager in a call center in Omaha. It was scheduled to be looked at in 7 to 10 business days. Back in New York, The financial news was becoming a feeding frenzy. A prominent Wall Street analyst went on television and delivered a brutal assessment. A company like Origin Dynamics, led by someone as meticulous as Evelyn Reed, does not pull a $300 million contract on a whim. The fact that they are remaining silent is the most damning piece of evidence. It suggests the reason is so egregious that simply stating it would invite a lawsuit. Investors are selling not because of the lost contract, but because they are terrified of what we don't know. By noon, Stellara Air had lost over $1.2 billion in market capitalization. Richard Sterling was no longer just angry. He was terrified. The beast he had ridden to the top of the corporate world was turning on him, and he had no idea why. He felt like a man in a locked room, being bludgeoned by an invisible assailant. The idea that the root cause could be something as small as a single flight, a single passenger, and a single plate of fish was so far beyond his comprehension that it didn't even register as a possibility. Liam Peterson went back to his Stanford dorm room feeling deeply conflicted. He had footage of one of the most respected CEOs in the world being systematically disrespected by an airline crew. He knew it was explosive. He also knew that posting it could have unforeseen consequences for himself and for Dr. Reed. He wasn't a journalist or an activist. He was just a kid who had been in the right place at the wrong time. For a full day, he did nothing. He watched the news about Stellara's stock imploding and Origen's cryptic statement. The narrative being spun by analysts was all about corporate intrigue and backroom deals. No one was talking about what really happened. The truth was being completely missed. He thought about what he had seen, the quiet dignity with which Dr. Reed handled herself, the sneering contempt from Brenda, the captain's utter infuriating dismissal. It wasn't just bad service. It felt profoundly wrong. It felt like an injustice that deserved to see the light of day. On Tuesday evening, 24 hours after the flight had landed, he made his decision. He did a simple, clean edit of the video. He started with the footage of Brenda asking Evelyn for her original seat number. He included the confrontation over the meal, Evelyn's calm but firm recitation of her credentials, and the purser's panicked reaction. The centerpiece, however, was the final exchange with Captain Henderson. Seen through the objective lens of the camera, the captain standing over a seated passenger, telling her that her experience didn't matter, and that he considered the matter resolved, was damning. Liam wrote a simple factual caption: "I was on Stellara Air Flight SA-22 last night and witnessed the crew, including the purser and the captain, treat Dr. Evelyn Reed, CEO of Origin, with shocking disrespect and prejudice. This is how one of America's premium airlines treats a first-class passenger." He didn't add dramatic music or flashy titles. The raw footage was powerful enough. He uploaded it to Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok, tagging several major news outlets and using hashtags Stellara Air, Evelyn Reed, # flying while black, Stellara shame. Then he closed his laptop and held his breath. The video didn't just go viral, it detonated. Within the first hour, it had 100,000 views. By the morning, it was in the millions. The hashtags were trending globally. The story was no longer a dry financial report. It was a deeply human and infuriating drama. Everyone could understand the injustice of being treated poorly, of being disbelieved, of being dismissed. News outlets who had been starved for a reason behind the Origin pullout now had their smoking gun. They ripped the video, embedded it in their articles, and played clips on a loop on cable news. Aviation bloggers, diversity and inclusion experts, and business ethicists were all brought on to analyze every second of the footage. Brenda's sneer marks weakness, and Captain Henderson's arrogance were now public domain. They weren't just employees anymore. They were archetypes of prejudice, and corporate failure. For Stellara Air, the impact was apocalyptic. The financial damage of the contract loss was now dwarfed by the reputational cataclysm. Their vague statement about a misunderstanding looked like a pathetic lie. Richard Sterling's assertion that his crew was professional became a laughable soundbite. The airline was exposed not just as having a few bad apples, but as having a rotten core where the system itself protected and enabled such behavior. The public backlash was swift and brutal. Social media was flooded with calls to boycott the airline. Other black executives and travelers began sharing their own stories of discrimination they had faced on Stellara flights, creating a tidal wave of negative press. The complaint Evelyn had filed, just 77B419, was still sitting unread in an Omaha queue, while the entire world was acting as judge and jury. In his office, watching the video on a giant screen, Richard Sterling finally understood. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. It wasn't about contracts or negotiations. It was about a plate of salmon, a $1.2 billion plate of salmon. And he knew, with a certainty, that chilled him to the bone that the nightmare was only just beginning. The viral video acted as an accelerant on a raging fire. Stellara Air was no longer in a crisis. It was in a death spiral, and Richard Sterling's attempts to regain control only made things worse. His next move was a disastrous press conference. Flanked by nervous-looking lawyers, he read a stiff, pre-written statement announcing that the employees in the video had been suspended pending a full investigation. He offered a hollow apology to any customer who feels they have not received the standard of service we strive for. He never mentioned Dr. Reed by name. The public saw it for what it was, a cowardly, lawyer-vetted non-apology. The use of the word feels was particularly galling, implying that Evelyn's experience was a matter of perception, not fact. The hashtag #DeLoStellara began trending, filled with mockery and rage. The full investigation was a sham. Internally, the company was in chaos. Brenda Mark and Captain Henderson were brought in for interviews. Brenda was defiant, claiming the passenger was aggressive and that the video was taken out of context. Mark was a mess, admitting he should have handled it better, but ultimately defending the captain's authority. Captain Henderson was indignant, furious that his 30-year career was being destroyed by an overly sensitive passenger with a camera phone. But their stories didn't matter anymore. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Under immense pressure from the board, who were watching their own stock options evaporate, Richard Sterling had to act. The karma was as swift as it was brutal. Brenda was fired for gross misconduct, her 30 years of service ending with a security guard escorting her off the premises. Her union initially filed a grievance, but dropped it within days when the sheer volume of public vitriol made her case untenable. She became a pariah in the industry, her name synonymous with prejudice. Mark the purser was demoted to a junior flight attendant position. He was assigned to the least desirable routes, grueling overnight red-eyes and short-haul commuter flights. His career was effectively over a permanent monument to his own cowardice. Every time he walked down the aisle, he would be reminded of the moment he chose silence over integrity. Captain Henderson was forced into an early retirement. The FAA, prompted by the public outcry, opened a review of his record, which unearthed a pattern of dismissed passenger complaints over the years. His legacy as a respected senior pilot was erased, replaced by the image of an arrogant bully. But the final hardest landing was reserved for Richard Sterling. The board of directors, led by a formidable private equity magnate named Julian Croft, convened an emergency meeting. They had seen enough. The stock was down 40%. The brand was toxic. Sterling's fumbling, arrogant response had turned a manageable crisis into an existential threat. They demanded his resignation. effective immediately. Sterling, broken and defeated, had no choice but to accept. The lion of the boardroom had been brought down by a battle he never even knew he was fighting. 2 weeks later, Stellara Air, under new interim leadership, issued a full-page apology in every major American newspaper. They announced a complete overhaul of their diversity, equity, and inclusion training from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. They pledged millions to programs supporting minority business leaders. And in a final stunning move, they announced the formation of a new independent civilian oversight board to review all passenger complaints and guide their new training programs. The board asked Dr. Evelyn Reed to chair it. After careful consideration, she declined. Instead, she did something far more powerful. Through the Origin Dynamics Foundation, she provided a list of 3 nationally recognized DEI experts, sociologists, and civil rights leaders. She stated that her company would reconsider future partnerships only if Stellara hired one of them to lead the oversight board with full autonomy and an unlimited budget. It was the ultimate checkmate. She wasn't just walking away with her $300 million. She was dictating the terms of her opponent's reconstruction from the outside. She was forcing them to build the very system of accountability that was so profoundly absent on Flight SA-212. Evelyn Reed never spoke publicly about the incident. She never had to. Her actions had spoken with the force of a tidal wave. She had shown that power wasn't just about wealth or position. It was about the resolve to demand respect and the wisdom to use its absence as a catalyst for fundamental change. She lost an appetite for a meal, but in return, she served an entire corporation, a dish of consequences that they and the rest of the business world would never forget. While Stellara Air was grappling with its public immolation and the Herculean task of rebuilding its identity, the lives of those at the center of the storm were irrevocably altered. Calmer Evelyn Reed knew was not a single thunderclap of fate. It was a low, persistent echo ringing in the quiet moments long after the storm had passed. For Brenda, the echo was a deafening roar. Fired and publicly shamed, she found the world had become a hostile and alien landscape. Her face, thanks to Liam's viral video, was instantly recognizable. Simple trips to the grocery store became ordeals of whispered insults and hostile glares. The flight attendant community, a tight-knit world she had inhabited for over 3 decades, shunned her completely. Her name was a toxic brand. After months of fruitless searching, the only job she could find was stocking shelves on the night shift at a 24-hour big-box store. The fluorescent lights of the deserted aisles, a cruel mockery of the cabin lights she once commanded. She spent her nights in a bitter, resentful haze, scrolling through articles about the new Stellara. She watched news clips of the woman who had effectively replaced her culture, Dr. Annika Sharma, a sharp, formidable sociologist hand-picked from Evelyn's list. Dr. Sharma was everything Brenda was not: analytical, empathetic, and relentlessly focused on systemic change. Sharma's interviews were infuriatingly brilliant. She spoke not of punishing individuals, but of dismantling the architecture of indifference. She had initiated mandatory immersive training sessions for all 40,000 Stellara employees' simulations, where pilots and flight attendants were put in the shoes of marginalized passengers. She called it radical empathy training, and the media loved it. To Brenda, it was all a humiliating spectacle, a world gone mad, all because of one uppity passenger and a plate of fish. The echo in her empty apartment was the sound of her own irrelevance. For Liam Peterson, the Stanford student, the echo was one of unexpected celebrity. He was hailed as a citizen journalist, a digital giant slayer. He was offered a lucrative internship at a tech-focused media company and was profiled in magazines. But the fame was unsettling. He had simply recorded a truth that was happening in front of him. He was troubled by the ferocity of the online mob, even one aimed at people who deserved it. He saw how quickly the narrative had spun out of his control, becoming a global event. In a guest lecture for the university's ethics department, he spoke about his experience. "I didn't take that woman's career," he said to the packed hall. "I just held up a mirror. What she and her company saw in the reflection destroyed them." And for Richard Sterling, the deposed CEO, the echo was the sound of silence. The invitations to galas and charity golf tournaments stopped. The calls from headhunters were for roles far beneath his former station. His old colleagues and rivals spoke of him in hushed, cautionary tones at their country clubs. He had become a ghost in the corporate world he once ruled, a walking personification of a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated his opponent, not because she was a CEO, but because she was a black woman, and his privileged worldview had no framework for the consequences of that specific arrogance. Meanwhile, Dr. Sharma's work at Stellara continued. She unearthed the original unread complaint Evelyn had filed at JFK, Wharton 7B 419. She framed a copy of the report and hung it in the main boardroom at Stellara headquarters. "This, she announced to the assembled executives, is the most expensive document in this company's history. It is a receipt for the cost of not listening. We will look at it every day until we have earned the right to take it down." The echo of Evelyn's quiet complaint, once lost in the void of bureaucracy, was now the foundational text of a corporate reformation. A little over a year had passed. Stellara Air had survived. Under its new CEO, a pragmatic and respected industry veteran named Maria Harrison, the airline had stabilized. The stock had clawed back nearly half its losses. The Stellara Transformation Project, led by Dr. Sharma, was widely lauded as a model for corporate social responsibility. But for Evelyn Reed, it was all still theoretical. Words and press releases were one thing. Genuine lasting change was another. Then came the call she never expected. Her mother, who lived in a quiet community in Chicago, had suffered a fall and required emergency surgery. Evelyn needed to get there immediately. It was a stormy Thursday evening, and flights were being cancelled across the country. Her private jet was grounded due to the weather. Her assistant's frantic search yielded only one option that could get her to Chicago before morning: a single last-minute first-class seat on Stellara Air Flight SA-13. Havis Brown was aghast. "Absolutely not," he said over the phone. "We can wait for the weather to clear. Don't do it, Evelyn. Don't give them the satisfaction." "This isn't about them, Havis. It's about my mother," she replied, her voice firm. "Book the ticket." Walking down the jet bridge to board the flight felt surreal. She was braced for anything awkward: stares, fawning overcompensation, or worse, a sign that nothing had really changed beneath the glossy new PR campaign. The cabin was staffed by a crew that was noticeably more diverse than she remembered. The purser, a calm, middle-aged man with kind eyes, greeted her at the door. He glanced at his manifest. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reed. I'm Samuel. Please let us know if there's anything at all you need to make your flight more comfortable. We know this is a difficult trip for you." Evelyn paused. "How did you know that—" "Your office mentioned the family emergency when they booked," he said simply. "We're sorry for what you're going through, and will ensure you have the quiet and privacy you need." There was no grand apology, no awkward reference to the past. There was only quiet, professional empathy. It was, she had to admit, a perfect start. The flight proceeded with a smoothness that was profoundly different from her last experience. The service was attentive, but unobtrusive. But the real test, Evelyn knew, would be in how they handled imperfection. It came halfway through the flight, A young child in the economy cabin was having a severe asthma attack, and his parents were frantic. Evelyn watched as Samuel and another flight attendant managed the situation. There was no panic, only focused compassion. They calmly cleared a space, administered oxygen from the emergency kit, and used the onboard satellite phone to patch in a doctor on the ground. Samuel spoke to the parents with a reassuring authority, keeping them informed, while another attendant brought them water and comforted their other child. The situation de-escalated as quickly as it had arisen. The child's breathing stabilized. It was a masterclass in professional care, the very thing that had been so catastrophically absent on her flight a year ago. This crew wasn't just following a checklist, they were practicing a culture. As the plane began its initial descent into Chicago, Samuel approached her seat. "Dr. Reed," he began softly, "I hope you don't mind me saying this. I was a purser a year ago when the SA-2R2 incident happened. I wasn't on that flight, but I was part of the problem. Many of us were. We were complacent. We thought we knew what good service was." He paused, looking at the framed complaint form he'd seen in training. "What you did. It was a shock to the system that we desperately needed. It forced us to redefine our jobs. We're not just here to serve meals, we're here to serve people. So on behalf of the crew members who are trying to get it right, thank you." Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time she saw not an employee of a faceless corporation, but a man who had been part of a genuine, difficult, and meaningful change. After the plane landed and taxied to the gate, Evelyn made a call as she walked towards the terminal. "Havis," she said, her voice clear and decisive. "I want you to get in touch with Stellara's new CEO. Origen is launching a new logistics hub in the Midwest next quarter. Let them know they are invited to bid for the cargo contract." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Evelyn, are you sure?" "Yes," she said, watching the ground crew moving with quiet efficiency on the tarmac below. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Havis, especially when they've truly earned it." She hung up the phone. It was not a return to the massive $300 million deal of the past, but it was something more valuable, a bridge rebuilt. A recognition that true power wasn't just in the ability to tear something down, but in having the grace to acknowledge when it had been built back better. This story began with a simple act of prejudice at 35,000 feet and ended with a multi-billion-dollar corporation brought to its knees. It's a powerful reminder that in our interconnected world, no act of disrespect is truly private. Dr. Evelyn Reed didn't just win a battle. She rewrote the rules of engagement. She proved that the most effective response to being dismissed isn't to raise your voice, but to raise the stakes. The hard karma that hit Stellara Air wasn't just about one woman's power. It was about the inevitable consequence of a corporate culture that had lost its way, forgetting that its most valuable asset wasn't its fleet of planes, but the dignity of its passengers. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, please help it reach more people. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories where karma delivers the final verdict. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in her situation?